Blake Carson didn't ask for trouble. He paid cash to escape it. The day he closed on the 10-acre ranch just outside Briar Hills, he breathed deeper than he had in a decade. The scrubland was his now. No neighbors, no rules. And definitely no HOAs. The cedar posts arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a grizzled old trucker who spit sunflower seeds and laughed when Blake said, "I'm fencing it myself." "Good luck keeping M out," the man muttered. Pulling away, Blake didn't think much of it till he saw the woman standing across the dusty easement. She wore a sun visor, a golf cart idling beside her, and a look that could sour milk. Clipboard in hand, shoes too clean for ranch dirt. She watched him hammer every post, every rail. She never said a word. That changed on the third day. Blake wiped sweat off his brow and turned to see her on his side of the property line. "You can't build this," she snapped. "Aye, it violates community sightlines." Blake raised an eyebrow. "This is private land, county approved, my fence, my rules." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Winslow, Briar Hills HOA Vice President. And you're in our buffer zone." Blake stared at her for a beat. "Think your map's broken." "My deed says otherwise. Kindly step back off my land." She narrowed her eyes, took a photo with her phone, and marched back to her cart. He didn't see her again that day. He should have known better. The next morning, Blake was in the barn checking his well pump when he heard tires on gravel. He walked outside to find 2 sheriff's cruisers parked by his gate. One deputy was already approaching. "Sir," the officer began, "we received a report of hostile threats and unauthorized land development." Blake blinked. "From who?" The second deputy answered, flipping through his notepad. "Caller's name was Karen Winslow. Claimed you're constructing an unlawful barrier across shared community land." Blake motioned toward his porch, where a thick folder lay, his land deed, permits, boundary survey. The deputy skimmed it, then radioed dispatch. After a tense 20 minutes, the first deputy returned with a nod. "Looks like your fence is legal, sir. County records confirm your land's outside Briar Hills jurisdiction. We won't waste your time again." The cruisers pulled away. Blake thought that was the end of it. He thought wrong. That night, his motion lights triggered at 2:14 a.m. Someone was at the fence. Blake rolled out of bed, grabbed his flashlight, and slipped on boots. He stepped onto the porch. Beam scanning the perimeter. Nothing. Just silence and shadows dancing across cedar slats. But when he walked to the south corner, the one closest to the HOA boundary, his heart sank. The wire had been cut. Clean, deliberate. A perfect slice through both rows. A boot print in the mud. Fresh, Blake took photos, zipped them into a folder titled HOA Nonsense, and sent them to his lawyer with the subject line, "Trespassing begins," as he turned back toward the house. His porch light flickered and then clicked off entirely. He froze behind him. In the dark, he heard a faint hum, a low mechanical buzz. He looked up. A drone hovered just above the roofline. Red lights blinking, watching. Blake Carson had dealt with pushy neighbors before. But drones? Night surveillance? Snipped wires? That was new. The next morning, he reviewed the trail cam footage. The drone had approached from the east, flying low over the HOA side. It hovered for 3 minutes, scanning the perimeter, before zipping back toward Briar Hills. Its lights flickered, like some kind of warning signal. He emailed the footage to the sheriff's office. The deputy replied 2 hours later with a generic line, "We cannot pursue further unless trespassing is physical. Recommend consulting a civil attorney." So Blake made some calls. Motion lights upgraded, barbed wire reinforced, solar powered. Cameras installed at every corner post. They wanted to play games. They were about to find out just how stubborn one ex-military rancher could be. He had just finished mounting a second solar panel when the white SUV arrived. County insignia. On the side, 2 code enforcement officers stepped out, clipboards in hand, brows already furrowed. "Mr. Carson." The taller one asked, We're here to perform an inspection. We've received multiple anonymous complaints. Blake folded his arms. Slant is outside HOA oversight and already inspected by county zoning 6 weeks ago. The other one said, tapping her pen. But we were informed of new non-compliant structures, specifically fencing, unpermitted grading, and unauthorized drainage diversion. Blake blinked. Drainage diversion. The tall man pointed toward the culvert Blake had cleared to prevent flooding. That trench runs along a runoff path shared with Briar Hills. You may be diverting stormwater from their greenbelt. Blake laughed once. That trench was clogged with 6 years of mud and trash. I cleared it, not changed it. Still, the woman added, a formal notice will be filed pending investigation. We'll need to return with a hydrology consultant. They handed him a paper. Black ink, bold letters, notice of violation, code 1 for B, unapproved structure, non-compliant driveway width, failure to maintain community aesthetic. At the bottom, scrawled in script, filed by K. Winslow, Briar Hills Vice President. You're being weaponized, Blake muttered. The taller man gave a sheepish nod. Honestly, happens more often than you'd think in HOA-adjacent zones. We'll do our job, but we won't be anyone's errand boy. After they left, Blake called his lawyer. She's escalating. What can I do? Start a paper trail. His attorney said, every visit, every drone, every notice. Document everything. And whatever you do, don't retaliate. She's hoping you snap. That night, Blake stayed up late, watching his camera feed on a monitor he'd set up in the living room. Everything seemed quiet until 1:38 a.m. A silhouette appeared on screen. Someone on foot, hooded, walking slowly along the fence on his side of the line. Blake grabbed his phone, zoomed the lens. The figure knelt beside the fence post and sprayed something from a canister. Blake's breath caught. He bolted outside with his flashlight and camera, calling out, "You? Stop." But by the time he reached the spot, the figure was gone. Only the smell lingered, sharp, bitter, chemical. He looked down. 2 of his goats were already convulsing. One collapsed entirely, foam at its mouth. By dawn, the vet confirmed. Herbicide poisoning. That afternoon, Blake found a flyer pinned to his mailbox, a laminated notice in bright colors, titled Community Watch, Suspicious Livestock Operation Near HOA Boundary. At the bottom, report all activity to Karen, Winslow Neighborhood Safety Officer. Blake buried the goat under the mulberry tree near the barn. It was the 3rd time that week he'd had to clean up someone else's mess. He'd always believed in keeping the peace, but peace, he now realized, wasn't what Karen Winslow wanted. She wanted control. And she didn't care how far she had to reach to get it. The next morning, Blake filed a formal report with the County Livestock Health Board and submitted video stills to the Sheriff's Department. Nothing came of it. No arrests. No follow-up. By Friday, Blake had replaced 2 more security cameras, reinforced his gate, and updated the warning signs. Private property, no trespassing. Cameras active, do not cross the fence line, but around. 2 p.m., a pair of unmarked white pickup trucks pulled onto the shoulder of the road outside his property. 4 men in forest green jackets stepped out too, with clipboards. One with a surveying rod, and the last with a handheld aerial scanner. "Who are you?" Blake called out from the gate. "County Code Enforcement," the leader replied. "Special Environmental Division." "Funny," Blake said, "you're not wearing county badges?" The man held up a printed form, official-looking, sealed in plastic. "We're conducting a habitat assessment. This area borders a migratory corridor. For protected bird species, there's concern your fence may block their ground access." Blake stared at them for a long second. Then he unlocked the gate just enough to step out and photograph their vehicle plates. "Who sent you?" One of them finally admitted complaint. Came from the Briar Hills HOA, filed under Environmental Code Section 9.1. Blake knew that code. He'd read it in the violation, Karen, pinned to his fence post last week. But this wasn't about birds. The man with the aerial scanner was sweeping more than fence lines. He pointed the device directly at Blake's well house, his barn, and even the greenhouse under construction. "What are you really scanning for?" Blake asked. "Electromagnetic fields," the man replied. "Unauthorized energy collectors." Blake's fists clenched. "I've got a windmill fan running 2 lights and a solar panel for my camera battery. That's it." The man didn't blink. "That counts." By sunset, the trucks were gone, but they left behind a fresh violation notice staked to his mailbox. "Immediate cessation. Required unauthorized structural assembly penalties may be enforced under Section 9.1. Environmental subversion," at the bottom. Again, filed by K. Winslow Blake stormed back into the house and opened his deed zoning maps and county jurisdiction overlays. That's when he saw it. The northeast edge of his property. Less than 30 feet of overgrown scrub, technically overlapped a wildlife corridor flagged by a Briar Hills Environmental Beautification Initiative. It wasn't zoning law. It wasn't even enforceable. But it was on record Karen had done her homework, so Blake did his. He drove to the county assessor's office the next morning, requesting parcel records going back 40 years. When he asked about Briar Hills HOA's enforcement reach, the clerk pulled up a dusty, laminated map. "The HOA boundary ends here," she said. Pointing. Blake smiled. Because it was 2 lots short of where Karen claimed it ended. She'd overreached. Again, that night, Blake installed a new trail cam at chest height infrared. Silent, tucked in the tree line near the disputed corner. At 3:12 a.m., it captured a figure crawling under his fence. Not Karen this time. Someone younger. Male. Carrying spray, paint, and bolt cutters. On his hoodie, Briar Hills Beautification Crew, volunteer patrol at 3:12 a.m. The trail cam captured the truth. A teenage boy crawling under Blake's fence in a hoodie marked Briar Hills Beautification Crew, volunteer patrol, gripping bolt cutters and a spray can. Blake had seen enough by sunrise. He printed out the photo, framed it under the words, "Trespasser identified," and nailed it to the front gate post with bright red tape. Below it, in bold, "You have been recorded. Trespassing charges pending. Further incursion will be prosecuted." It wasn't just a warning. It was bait. That afternoon, he filed a trespassing report with the sheriff's department. The deputy gave him a tired look. "You're the guy with the fence, right?" Blake nodded. Double quotes. "Look," the deputy said, "we've had complaints. A lot. Your name keeps coming up. They're saying you're building a compound, stockpiling materials. They even said you've got underground wiring." Blake blinked. "You think I'm digging tunnels now?" The deputy shrugged. "People are paranoid, especially when someone from the HOA keeps calling every 2 days." Karen Blake returned home just as the sun was setting, his gut tight with dread. As he crested the hill to his barn, he stopped cold. There were 3 drones hovering over his pasture. Not one. They moved like synchronized wasps, all worry low over the fence line, filming, scanning. Each carried a stenciled label on its undercarriage. BHSA Briar Hills Security. Auxiliary. A homemade HOA Air Force. He recorded them on his phone, tracking their movements until one dipped too low and clipped his barbed wire. It spiraled down, sparking and spinning before crashing in a puff of dirt. Blake jogged over. The drone was still blinking, camera lens shattered. He picked it up and froze. Inside the casing was a tiny microphone. Live audio recording. This wasn't just surveillance. It was eavesdropping. He boxed it up and dropped it off at the sheriff's office with a signed affidavit. "If Karen's spying on me, I want it documented," he told the clerk. "That's not HOA business. That's criminal." When he returned home, the barn door was ajar. He always latched the barn. Blake stepped inside, hand resting on the concealed pistol holstered at his hip. At first, it looked normal, feed sacks stacked, lantern on the hook, goats bleating softly from their pen. Then he heard it, a soft chirping, not animal, electronic. He followed the sound to the loft. where hay was, piled in bales. It was buried beneath the third one, a blinking black box, the size of a shoebox. Wires. Antenna. Label scratched off and tucked beside it a crumpled HOA flyer. The one Karen posted last week warning neighbors about his unauthorized livestock operation. But someone had scribbled on the back in blue ink, "He's hiding something. Record everything." Blake stood still, pulse thundering in his ears. They weren't just watching, they thought he was a threat that night. Blake sat on his porch with the barn light off, eyes fixed on the tree line. No drones, no voices. Just the wind. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "No caller ID." He answered. The voice on the other end was distorted. "She's not working alone. You need to be careful. They meet Thursdays. K. In the community clubhouse basement. Ask about Section 8 Delta." The line went dead. The clubhouse was built like a mausoleum, beige stucco, fake columns and American flags faded from too many HOA barbecues. It sat on the east edge of Briar Hills, nestled between tennis courts and a perfectly symmetrical rose garden. Blake never thought he'd willingly step foot on HOA property. But Thursday night at 8 p.m., he did just that. He wore a ball-cap flannel shirt and scuffed boots, a look forgettable enough to pass as a handyman or a delivery guy. In his pocket, a pocket-sized recorder and a laminated map of the clubhouse he'd pulled from the county. Permit archives. The main hall buzzed with polite conversation and plastic cups of cheap Chardonnay. Retired couples milled around, commenting on irrigation upgrades and dog poop fines. But Blake wasn't here for the HOA potluck. He was here for Section 8-Delta at the far end of the clubhouse. A hallway led to a maintenance door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." He waited until a janitor passed through, then slipped in before the door clicked shut. Down a flight of concrete stairs was a dim corridor lit by a single flickering bulb. It reeked of bleach and dust. Blake followed the scent of fresh paint until he found a door with a coded keypad and a small metal plaque, 8 Delta. He pressed his ear to the steel. Voices not arguing, organizing. He's building something. The sensors picked up unregistered M signatures. The north corner is hot. Then he's hiding tech. Maybe weapons grade? Karen said she saw a bunker entrance last week. Blake's stomach tightened. They weren't just paranoid. They thought he was military black ops. He hit record on his device. Then gently turned the knob. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open to reveal a converted storage room, now filled with folding tables, laptops, and corkboards crowded with maps of Blake's property, satellite printouts, thermal scans, even copies of his original land deed with sections circled in red ink in the center. A poster-sized board labeled Risk Containment Operations Cedar Watch, and standing next to it in a freshly ironed blazer and HOA name tag, Karen Winslow. She didn't notice Blake yet. She was too busy speaking to a group of 10 people, all in polo shirts with Briar Hills Safety Auxiliary embroidered in gold thread. "And that's why we invoked 8 Delta, Karen said. Calmly, "This isn't about fences anymore. He's interfering with regional zoning continuity. His power grid isn't on our registry. We can't afford another incident like the Walker Place fire." A woman raised her hand. "But he hasn't broken any actual laws." Karen smiled coldly. "He will. You just have to watch long enough." Blake's blood ran cold. He backed up slowly, heart pounding, but then his boot caught on a doorstop and clattered against the tile. Karen's head snapped around. "You?" she hissed. A whistle shrieked. Lights flicked on. Blake bolted up the stairs, ducked past a startled HOA volunteer, and sprinted across the manicured lawn into the dark, the last thing he heard before jumping the fence. Back into his property was Karen's voice echoing after him. "Initiate phase 2, he knows." The next morning began with sirens. Blake was yanked from sleep by flashing red lights pouring through his bedroom window. He sprinted outside barefoot and stopped cold. 3 county fire trucks sat rumbling on his front pasture. Engines hissing, radios crackling. A sheriff's cruiser idled behind them. "What the hell?" Blake shouted. A fire marshal approached. "Sir, we received a 911 call at 4:13 a.m. reporting a barn fire and potential livestock distress. Caller claimed smoke was visible from Briar Hills. Your property's flagged as high risk." Under the local fire watch protocol, there's no fire, Blake snapped. Never was. The deputy stepped forward. Standard procedure. We still have to document it. 10 minutes later, after walking the barn, they confirmed no heat signatures, no smoke, and no signs of anything wrong. Aside from Blake's obvious fury, that's the 3rd false report in a week, Blake growled. Someone from that HOA is weaponizing emergency services. The fire marshal looked uneasy. "I'm not supposed to say anything, but yeah, the same name keeps coming up. Karen Winslow." Back inside, Blake found a new alert on his phone. Grid. Disruption, your solar relay has been remotely deactivated. Manual override required. Another popped up seconds later. Water pump disabled. Signal disruption detected. He stormed into the utility shed. His inverter panel fried. The battery. Bank. Offline, a neatly snipped coaxial relay wire lay curled like a dead snake beneath the console. The sabotage had been surgical. Whoever did this knew exactly what to cut. By noon. County code enforcement showed up unannounced. Again, new complaint. The officer said, not even bothering to fake courtesy. Noise violations. Someone reported you're operating unauthorized machinery at night. Industrial-grade equipment. Blake barked a laugh. I sleep by 9 and run 2 heat lamps for goats. Well, the officer said we still have to walk the property. Blake folded his arms. Then bring a warrant next time. They left, but not without leaving another warning notice fluttering from the gate, like a white flag dipped in gasoline. Inside. Blake opened the surveillance footage. There, on grainy infrared, were 2 figures dressed in all black, crawling along. The south fence at 3:42 a.m., they paused at the junction box. One carried wire cutters. The other had a tablet. It wasn't just HOA busybodies anymore. These people had gear. That afternoon, Blake drove 2 hours north to visit an old friend from his Army intel days. Owen Reyes, a man who knew enough about digital security to make most hackers nervous. Owen listened, nodding slowly. When Blake showed him a photo of the drone with BHSA written underneath, Owen narrowed his eyes. That's not just a drone. That's a Harkin Crowther R12. Civilian use is limited. They're used for field reconnaissance, asset mapping. Sometimes law enforcement. Karen has access to military-grade surveillance. Or she knows someone who does. They disassembled the broken drone in Owen's garage. Inside the frame was a chip with encrypted firmware and a custom sub-channel frequency. Military firmware adjacent, but tweaked. Whoever modified this, Owen muttered, knew exactly what they were doing. That's not HOA tech. Contractor level. Blake exhaled. Then it's not just Karen anymore, he said. It's whoever's backing her. Owen looked up. You sure you want to go deeper? You poke this thing too hard. It might push back. Blake looked down. At the printed violation notice still crumpled in his pocket. Then he smiled. Let it try. Owen had a theory and a laptop full of tools. Within 2 hours. He traced the drone's firmware registry to a known contractor tag buried deep in metadata logs. Stagcom Technologies. Blake leaned over his shoulder. Who are they? A tier? Surveillance subcontractor, Owen said. They sell to municipalities, police departments, even HOAs with big budgets. But this drone serial doesn't match any listed on STAG's public manifest. Blake frowned. So it was bought. Off the books. Owen nodded, or at least through a shell buyer. A quick dive through licensing forms led them to an address listed under Briar Hills Beautification Initiative, LLC, the same name. Blake had seen spray painted on the volunteer's hoodie 2 weeks ago. They weren't just a neighborhood group. They were incorporated. I've got their I number, purchase orders, and a name, Owen said, pointing to a digital invoice. Surveillance package bought 6 months ago. Guess who signed it? Blake already knew. Karen Winslow, treasurer. They printed everything. The invoice, drone specs, video proof, the trespasser footage, and Blake drove straight to the county sheriff's office. This time, he didn't ask for help. He asked for a lawyer. Within 48 hours, Blake filed a formal cease and desist letter against the HOA, citing unlawful surveillance, harassment, property damage, and malicious misrepresentation. Under Title 18 statutes, he served Karen personally at the Briar Hills board meeting. He didn't expect the reaction. Karen didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, she smiled like someone who'd been waiting for him to cross that line. The next morning, Blake woke to a court summons nailed to his gate. Temporary emergency injunction, civil suit 9-B, zoning hazard and community risk plaintiff. Briar Hills Homeowners Association, defendant Blake Mercer accused him of creating a disruptive and unsafe infrastructure zone that endangered local ecosystems, property values, and community mental well-being. Worse still, it requested temporary seizure of land use rights for a full 9-day injunction, pending formal review. They were trying to take his land, not buy it, not fine him. Take it. Blake stood in the courtroom 2 days later, flanked by his attorney, face stone set as Karen and 2 HOA board members smugly presented their case. They showed photos, infrared scans of Blake's property, twisted into nightmare colors to suggest heat anomalies and radiation fields. They played edited clips of drone footage, his greenhouse mid-construction, captioned with fabricated notes like possible explosives, cache, and covert bunker inlet. And then they dropped the final hammer, a forged email, supposedly from Blake to a supplier, requesting off-grid expansion gear and military-grade shielding panels. Blake laughed aloud. That's not my email. That's not even my domain. But the judge was no tech expert. He asked for a recess to review evidence. Back in the hallway, Karen approached Blake with that same frozen smile she always wore when she knew the rules were rigged in her favor. You should have just stayed on your side of the fence, she said quietly. Blake stepped closer. You made this personal. Oh, sweetie, Karen said, tucking a binder under her arm. This isn't personal. This is precedent. I warned the board about people like you, independent thinkers, fence builders. Now I get to make an example out of you. Then she walked away. But Karen didn't notice the small flash drive that Blake's attorney had handed the bailiff 5 minutes earlier. It contained raw video footage, uncut. High race of a Briar Hills volunteer drilling into Blake's utility box, a side-by-side of the drone crash, and a screen recording of Owen's trace back to Stag Cum, complete with Karen's signature. They hadn't just violated his rights, they'd committed felonies. The courtroom buzzed like a hornet's nest. When the bailiff returned from chambers with a printed transcript and a USB drive labeled Exculpatory Exhibit A. Everything changed. Judge Maynard sat stiffly at the bench, hands folded as if holding back the tide. The court has reviewed newly submitted evidence, and I am stunned. Karen's lips twitched. Your Honor, this is sit down, Mrs. Winslow, the judge snapped. This isn't your HOA meeting. Gasps rippled through the room. On the monitor, the court watched raw footage from Blake's trail cam. 2 masked individuals crawling under his fence, one whispering, cut it fast. She wants it dark before the county comes. The next clip, the crashed drone BHSA, badge in full view. Then Owen's screen capture. A registry pull of the surveillance hardware, Karen Winslow, treasurer. Briar Hills Beautification Initiative, LLC. Signature ID match, 98.4%. And then, the dagger and unedited recording of a Section 8 Delta HOA meeting. Karen saying, you just have to watch long enough. He'll slip up eventually. The courtroom went dead quiet. Judge Maynard turned red. This wasn't zoning enforcement. This was an organized campaign of harassment, surveillance, and probable property sabotage. Karen stood up. That recording is inadmissible. You broke federal communication laws. The judge cut in. Sit down. She did, but not before shooting Blake a venomous glare. One that said, this isn't over. But it was, at least in court. The judge dismissed the injunction, voided the violations, and ordered an immediate investigation into Briar Hill's HOA leadership. He even instructed the sheriff's department to seize the HOA's drone tech for analysis. Outside the courthouse, reporters circled like buzzards. Karen shoved past them, sunglasses on, hair perfect, mumbling no comment as camera shutters popped like popcorn. Blake didn't stop her. He didn't need to by the following week. Karen had resigned from the board pending investigation. A local paper ran the headline, Suburban Surveillance. HOA leader accused of orchestrating illegal campaign. Within days, the Beautification Initiative LLC was dissolved. But Blake wasn't interested in headlines. He was back home rewiring his inverter panel, restoring water lines, and mending the scars in the land until he got the letter. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just a wax seal faintly imprinted with the logo he now recognized: :stag-cum. Inside was a single line, printed in courier font. She wasn't the only one watching. Blake read it twice, then burned it. Epilogue. 6 months later, Blake's ranch stood stronger than ever. The goats thrived. The fence remained triple reinforced. Cameras replaced every angle. The local community, once skeptical, now waved when they passed by. He'd become a quiet symbol. The man who stood his ground, Karen. She moved to towns over. Rumor had it she'd joined a strategic neighborhood development board in a gated community downstate. Old habits, Blake thought, die hard. But sometimes, late at night, he still caught the hum of a drone. Not HOA branded. Not commercial. Just. There. Watching. But now Blake didn't flinch. He stared straight into the lens and smiled. Because this time, he wasn't afraid of being seen. He wanted them to know. He'd won, and he was just getting started.